here we are, diversity. So, I think you know what I mean. I think it's pretty obvious, but let me just name the elephant in the room anyway. And all right, I'll say it. I'm a tall person. Markeith is less tall.
With a big head.
But we have not let that interfere with our friendship and the respect we have for one another. Despite the inches that separate us, we still. All right, why am I framing it this way, making light of something that's obviously a very heavy and fraught issue? And those of you with a long memory will harken back to Randy Newman, probably, on this. And, it's a laugh or cry issue. I don't feel like crying about it at the moment, but, we get up every day and we can, will, and even expect to be treated differently solely on the basis of our skin color, which is a prima facie absurdity and yet nonetheless the world we live in. So my job here today mostly is to introduce Mr. Canada. When Leslie did me the honor of asking me to come back and speak, I said, it's diversity, that sounds great. I have a lot to say about that, but it's also really fraught, and I'm a lot less interesting than he is. So do you mind if I bring Mr. Canada along? I met Miss, and she agreed. I met Mr. Canada at the Muskegon Correctional Facility about 14 years or so ago. We ran, through Grand Valley, ran a program up there. And that all by itself is a diversity cliche, I suppose. The credentialed white guy going up to deal with mostly the poor black masses in prison. I just have to trust me. It was our intent to put material on the table between myself and the Grand Valley students and the student inmates and learn what we could from them, offer what we could to them. And almost every Grand Valley student who's gone through the program has said, I learned so much more from the guys there than I'm sure they learned from me. And I looked at them, and having sat in on some of their classes, said, yep, you're absolutely right. You did learn a lot more than you taught, believe me. We had a program that was funded by the Kellogg Foundation for a while, and part of that grant allowed us to develop a philanthropy program. The guys in the 13, 14 guys who were part of that, first time to our knowledge, had control over $30,000 of this $200,000 grant to designate and develop a philanthropic project that we then carried out outside the prison. Markeith emerged not only in that program but in others as a clear leader, and like I said, it's been my privilege to continue to get to know him as he's gotten out and pursues his life in Grand Rapids. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to him. I wondered, I might stay up here. I probably will stay up here. We agreed that maybe we'd do a little bit of Q&A if he said something, and I would jump in, or actually we could even open it up if you want early on. I can go on. I'm not saying anything he doesn't know. If I tell you, he can go on too. So part of my function too is to keep an eye on the clock. So, and the weather. But with that, I don't know. Do you want to start by maybe explaining your title a little bit, the natural and unnatural piece of this?
Today we're going to speak on the natural and the unnatural, nature and nurture of diversity, and try to give you a twist, a different idea of what diversity is, because I believe that most of us have sort of like a generic interpretation of what diversity is, and sometimes to clarify and specify exactly what type of diversity we're trying to incorporate in our lives, in our community, within our organizations, and our bodies. Sometimes we need a little assistance from the people we're trying to help. Right? But I first want to say the music. The second song, man, I almost wanted to jump up like I was in a Baptist church. I've never seen a guitar standing face up have so much soul. And the second song, after you told us what the title of the song was, like I actually could visualize the two rodents chasing each other around. So that was beautiful music. And with that, we'll proceed.
Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit about what you mean by natural and unnatural?
I have in my own opinion, diversity is sort of, if you look at your life as being as you're trying to preserve yourself, right? You're trying to preserve your family. You're trying to preserve your culture, your language, your finances, whatever it is. To sort of begin to diversify that is to put yourself at risk, right, of actually losing that in which you're trying to preserve, right? And diversity is a necessity because in modern society, we need to be able to have complexity, different ideas, different cultures, different foods. Like if we grew up eating the same thing every day, I'm pretty sure hot dogs and pork and beans just not going to get it for 365 days a year. So we begin to incorporate different things. So the diversity is necessary, but I think it sort of goes against the core of what we value in our own lives, right? But what we value culturally or ideologically in our eyes, right? So I think diversity should be interchanged with the word inclusion, because the way we just described it in the circle talk is that if you look at diversity as being a pie or a graft, right? That you can have 12 people that sit at the table and they all have a specific portion of this pie that they know that they're going to get because it's dedicated to them. There's 12 slices, so there's 12 people, there's 12 pieces of pie to be dished out. So diversity allows a 13th person to come into that graft, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee him a piece of the pie because it's already been dished out. Whereas with inclusion says that we'll allow this 13th person to come to the table and we're willing to sacrifice a portion of our pie to make a 13th slice. How are you going to do that? I don't know. Supreme math, I guess, right? And we're going to allow you access to information, to resources, to our culture. We want to hear what it is that you need or what you want in your life, right? So whenever we include, like it's easy to look at the world and say, well, that's an issue, that's an issue, that's an issue, that's bad, that's not good, that's unacceptable. But that's based upon your perspective in life. That's based upon your own values, your own morals, your own, background belief, your religious beliefs, your educational background. But I believe that what we see as being an issue is more a symptom of a problem. So with diversity, we sort of try to put a Band-Aid on this festering wound and not really dealing to what the cause of the problem is, right? So when a doctor goes into, the emergency room, or a patient goes into the emergency room, he needs to see a doctor. The doctor comes into the room with his education, his past experience with other patients that had this same ailment. So he has an idea of what's wrong. But until he asks the patient, what are you feeling? What's wrong? What brought you in today? He doesn't really know. He can assume because this guy's like half his leg is gone, he's hurting, right? But if that patient didn't come because he had his wound was already healed up, he may have had a stomach problem. But until the doctor asked that person, what's wrong? What brought you in today? Well, doc, I had a headache. Well, what did you have? Well, I got in a car accident 2 days ago. Well, he was focusing on this missing leg, but it got amputated in Vietnam, so it's been gone, So I think until with diversity, we sort of address issues based upon what we believe the problems are with not necessarily culture, because most of the time we look at diversity, we think of racial diversity, but you also have an alternative lifestyle community that needs to be incorporated. You also have some women that feel left out that need to be incorporated. You also have some cultural things that need to be incorporated. So when we think of diversity, I think the blanket statement that shuns away a lot of people is, oh, that means it's almost like affirmative action, right? It sort of makes people nervous because it feels uncomfortable to them. But I think inclusion is the word that we should be using more than, or diversity, inclusion within diversity seems to be a better phrase.
As you've experienced it over your own life, both in and out, what don't you get asked then? What didn't, for even our program, I mean, what didn't come up that you wish had?
I think most people come to a person with a solution to a problem that they never asked a question for. So it's like, oh, he needs to go to school, or he needs a job. But that person might necessarily not need a job at that time. He may have a medical condition that needs to be addressed. He may have housing issues that need to be addressed. So I think the average person, they're coming with good intention, they're coming good-hearted, they're coming to actually help another person, but they haven't asked that person what it is that they need in their life to affect change. So they come with the solution instead of knowing what the problem is already, because the solution is based upon their assumptions of what the problem is.
And if we came to you with that question, where would you start? Okay,
My finance, well, I've been out probably 2 years now. Has it been over 2? I don't even know. Time's been flying. I'm having too much fun. But it's been over 2 years now. So like my needs today are completely different from my needs, 2+ years ago. My whole thing right now is, just my housing. That's my main issue. I live in a home where I pay rent or whatever, but I'm in the process of purchasing a home. So the issue is I have a job, I make decent money, I pay all my bills, everything's on time, but I have never had a credit card. So they say, well, you don't have enough of a credit history. But then I know another person that has a long credit history and it's not good, right? So it's like, and that person doesn't have a job, but that person gets credit cards in the mail like every day. So it seems like society has everything sort of tipsy-turvy. So like if you abuse your credit or your finances in the past, then they'll give you more access to credit. But if you have never misused your credit, you don't have. So it's like I'm going through this thing like, okay, well, your credit history is not extensive enough. You need to have more revolving accounts. I can't afford to have revolving accounts, right? So it's like, that's my main thing now, is just like, so I learned to play the system a little bit. I haven't signed for a credit card yet. I get them like every single day, and I just can't see myself paying $25 for every 100 I spend. So it's like, since I'm in this position, I think, okay, well, I'm fine. I'll just pay cash for whatever I need. So, but housing is the main thing right now. I mean, I got approved for a mortgage loan. It's not enough to live in the city of Grand Rapids. But if I drive all the way to Hamilton, it'll be an hour and a half away from my house, but I can get a pretty good house out there on 3 acres. But
and I'm sure they'll be very happy to see you.
That'll be diversity. If I get to
Well, we did solve one problem there today. We just integrated Hamilton.
And it's known as the snow belt of Michigan. I don't think for long if I show up. But it's just like, some things are just like, I mean, when you live life and, you've been in it. So there's like this transitioning period where you graduated from high school and, you went to college and, you accumulate a little bit of debt and you clean it up a little bit. Then, got married and, everything worked out. So you sort of transition through life. But when you spend a large portion of your life in prison to where you miss that transition period, it's sort of like, I never had any account. Now I need an account. So it's just like, there's no transition period. And I think that puts most ex-felons at the greatest disadvantage. It's just that the housing thing, you have no rental history, you have no extensive work history, you have no credit history. So your access to capital is, like, they sent me a $300 credit card. Like, my car note is more than that. My insurance is more than that. So it's, I don't want it. But a lot of people aren't in the position that I'm in to be able to turn those things. Like, if I was like, maybe if I would have got that credit card like the second day I was out, I probably would have said, okay, yeah. And then realized like, oh, I'm paying $75 for $300. It's like a loan shark, But now I've been so used to just paying for what I want. If I can't afford it, I don't buy it. But I can't afford to pay cash for a home, so we got to negotiate.
Do you want to talk about a little bit about, we're talking about this on the way up and a little bit in the circle, diversity in the African community itself? And you made a point earlier that there's, white people see distinctions among themselves that they don't see.
Yes, I think it's like, whenever you see, like, white people look at African Americans as being African American or black. That's a black guy. Who is it? It's the black guy over there. It's the African American guy. No negativity or anything negative associated with that. Just the way that it's easy to categorize that person. But when they're amongst themselves, it's sort of like, oh yeah, my he's from France. No, we're from England, we're Dutch, we're this. Like they identify the cultural differences within their group. But when they look at an African American, it's just like, that's a black person. But within the African American community, there's the same distinctions. Oh, my people are from the West Indies. Oh, they're from Jamaica. Oh, no, we came from, Guatemala. And you're like, a black person in Guatemala? Yeah, there's a lot of us there. Majority of slaves went to South America. Most people here in America don't know that, in Brazil. So it's sort of like we identify the traits within ourselves, but like the white community is like, that's a black guy. But when there's another person, they hear the last name, oh, you're Dutch? Yeah, my people are from, oh, you're Irish? They identify those traits. And I think when you're in a dominant culture, it's easy to do that because it's acceptable. I'm a proud Irishman. I'm a proud this. Now with the new trend is I'm a Viking, So you want to be known as a pillager and a savage, right? So it's like,
I think we've got that covered.
So it's like, people are, proud to be of their heritage. But like if you see a person with a Black Lives Matter shirt on, he's not saying Jamaican lives matter, and he's just saying Black lives and all matter. Sort of, it shuns a few people away. It's sort of like, is that saying that white lives doesn't matter? No, we're just saying that right now at this point in history, Black lives should matter to everyone. And it was a front to the police department, and it wasn't necessarily a front to white people. But until someone says that this is not directed at white people, it's really directed at the powers that be that wear badges, then, they can sort of understand that. But it's amazing, like, I don't know about here in Grand Haven, but like in the city of Grand Rapids, it's actually like more white kids walking around with Black Lives Matter shirts on than black kids. Like it's weird. Like I actually drove, I actually think I was reporting from my parole officer, and I came on Kalamazoo, and it was a white lady, hair purple or periwinkle, whatever color it was. Her hair was just down, had an earring in her nose and everything. She had a Black Lives t-shirt on. I just was like, so I rolled my window down. I was like, thank you. Because I never had one of those shirts on, but for her to take time out of her life, and to me, she was like, if you're a conscientious person, then you're able to identify that. But she like went against everything she stands for, whether she's alternative lifestyle, whatever it is, like, okay, you know what? I'm putting on this shirt and I'm standing on the busiest street in Grand Rapids. And she wasn't hiding it or anything. And I'm just like, she's representing me, but I have never worn one of those shirts. I don't even know anyone that probably had one of those shirts. But she had that shirt on. And, it almost brought a tear to my eye, but I weigh 250 pounds, so I don't want to cry. But it was beautiful, actually.
It does bring up two questions, I guess, from you then. One, do you feel dependent upon the powers that be, some elements of the white majority? And then secondly, from the time you went into now, this couple of years been out, do you see something like progress? Are you surprised or delighted by something that you see?
They're sort of like an amalgamation of cultures. So it's sort of like there's no such thing as that's white music and that's black music, that's white food, that's black food. When you hear Martha Stewart say, I'm going to cook some greens today, you sort of just like, that's what my grandmother cooked was greens. Even though Martha Stewart was talking about spinach, my grandmother was talking about collard greens. It's, just the terminology is, there's amalgamation of cultures. But to depend, me as an individual, I'm the type of person that I try to pull myself up by my own bootstraps and, Frederick Jackson Turner style, rugged individualism. I just try to push through life and get whatever I need ahead. But I think that there is an easement that comes with, the dominant culture saying, okay, you know what, we acknowledge that there are people that's at a disadvantage, and, we're sort of pushing policy and we're sort of pushing issues and we're pushing laws that could affect that person's transition, or not just for ex-felons, but just for blacks or, single mothers. Or my greatest fight right now is, it seems like the black man is like the worst thing that can happen. Like he's being affronted on every single corner, from the police to the culture to his girlfriend to his children. It's just like it's so many different fights that we have to face. So for the dominant culture to actually come forth and say, there is a disadvantage, there is a sort of disenfranchisement that's going on, and we need to enact certain, and it's actually being done. It's just not happening fast enough, right? But people, like I'm pretty sure everyone is aware that there are issues. Everyone is aware that there are a bunch of a-holes in every culture, every color, every hairstyle, whatever. You know, if you're going to be one of those, you're going to be one of those. You know, a bad person is a bad person. It has nothing to do with culture. It has nothing to do with race. But it's easier to point at another person as being a disadvantage, make a whole vast judgment on, I'm not going to talk to them because that's the way they are. Well, you know, they said the same thing about the Irish back in the 1800s with, you know, with the gangs in New York. So like, oh, they're just stubborn. I'm not going to deal with them. And, you know, those stereotypes still persist, but it's easier to swallow a stereotype that looks sort of like you look than it is someone that's in complete opposition of you. So
I do have more, but actually, I'm thinking this would be a great opportunity for people who aren't going to stick around. Does anybody want to sit in on a question? And we're used to being impolite, so really, yeah.
We seem to have two cultural views of this. One is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm successful because I did what was necessary. Oh, here we go. I did what was necessary to be successful, therefore I did it myself. And then there's the other side which says everybody needs a hand. It's more nurturing. We need programs. We need this. We need that. And we seem to have two political parties that reflect that. So I think I know the answer that I would give, but I want to turn it around and say I'm from the nurturing side of things, but where are we getting it wrong? You may have already answered a part of this, right, but I want you to expand on that.
I think most of the wrong answers come from, as I said before, not asking what's necessary. Like you can put a person in school, right? Let's say that, okay, this person needs to go to college. So you get that person a scholarship. But if that person goes to college and he doesn't have food and he doesn't have housing and he doesn't have transportation, he has no job, you helped an issue that you thought was an issue, but the surrounding and the secondary issues are not resolved. So therefore, that person is almost set up to fail. Because now it's sort of like, okay, I got to work in order to pay rent, and you know, I can't afford, I got to take less classes this year, so on and so forth. But I think once you give a person a hand up, let's just say in life, like God tells you that you got one thing that I'm going to help you with, and after that, it's just all grace from there, right? And you have the opportunity to tell God, God, this is what I need, because no man knows greater than himself what he needs in his life to change himself, right? So he says, you know what, God, this is what I need. God grant you that wish. Now it's up to you to take all of those fruits and do what you need to do with your life. And that's where the problem comes in, is that no one really asks, what is it that I can do for you? What is it that I can do for your community? What as a power, as an entity, you know, because individually you can affect an individual life, you can, you know, affect a small group life, but if you're trying to change a whole community, it has to be a community that moves forth to change that community. But you have to be able to exchange ideas and actually know what the problem is and not necessarily just the symptoms.
Both of you talked a little bit this morning before the service about the current things that happen in education to try to address diversity might be going in the wrong direction. I wonder if you could expand on that for this group. It's a little bit follow-up. You've done some readings about that, Michael.
The ways in which diversity is being approached, or diversity and inclusion. Yeah. So one of the things I said this morning was that I'm not convinced that the way a lot of institutions, certainly including my own, address the issue of diversity and inclusion. And I appreciate Markeith's distinction between the two. That diversity, you can see the table. Inclusion, you can actually get to be at the table and get some of the spoils from the table. Those are two very different things. And my approach is science-based. I do accept the evolutionary findings of the in-group, out-group conceptualization of the way we were, have been, continue to be in many regards. And the studies show that 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds do tend to prefer their own groups. And they're not blank slates. We come in with innate biases and dispositions towards our own. And then the culture reifies those differences or tries to overcome them depending on what the culture values, right? So here, because in the States, race is the primary and has been the primary issue, we tend to exaggerate or exacerbate racial tensions and differences. And what happens oftentimes in diversity programs, at least that I'm familiar with and I see, is it's a didactic or sort of shame-based approach, which is stop being what you innately are, rather than acknowledging that, of course, the impulses, the dispositions are there, and saying, okay, what fruitfully can you do over time to begin to erode those biases, or at least your actions that flow from those biases. Instead, it's, well, put yourself in Markeith's shoes for half an hour, and walk that walk, and then you'll understand exactly what his life is like, and your whole life will change. It's like, well, no, it won't. I might be more grateful for my life, at that point is great. But one of the things I know for sure is I sure don't want to be anywhere close to his life, right? And so I got all these kids, who are in class who suppress this stuff because they know it's politically incorrect to voice some of their very, natural, unformed, unfortunate, but natural tendencies or impulses. It gets suppressed, and then it comes out in all these weird, strange ways that you end up on YouTube and, Facebook and frat houses. No offense to fraternity members, but there's a kind of sublimation of it, pressurized, and then there's a backdoor channel. And so we never, in my opinion, we're still not really addressing what's true about us to begin with, and acknowledging that. All right, where can we go from here?
It's like historically we know that forced policy never changes anything. It makes people dance to a different tune, but if you put your boot on a person's neck and make them do something, that's not making that person really incorporate that into their life, right? So you can come with these policies, and like institutions can say, well, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. But if universities and institutions are supposed to be free think tanks, well, our children develop who they are or who they will be in the future, to sort of stifle that because it's not what's popular at the moment. It's sort of to not allow them to really come into the end of, like, even if they say something that someone doesn't like, let the climate change that person. Like, change happens naturally. Evolution is sort of, now you can sort of tamper with it a little bit, and, you may end up with an atomic bomb, but you may end up with something beautiful, but I think people change just by experiencing, like you were saying earlier, with proximity, just like enjoying other people. And you say, you know what, maybe what I said was wrong. Maybe that's not necessarily true. Maybe my dad told me wrong. Maybe my grandfather was wrong, because most of the bad stuff we learn, as far as culture comes from our grandparents.
I know.
I see a lot of gray hair here.
Grandparents are the source
But most of the bad stuff we learn from our family, whether it's, subtly to where, we're not going over there because that's not our neighborhood. And, children pick up on that, as a sponge. They absorb that, or, no, we're not going to eat at that restaurant. I don't want those pig feet and collard greens, It's sort of like they pick up on that. So when they get older, it's like, no, we don't eat that kind of stuff. We don't want to do that. So they pick up on that, and either it's going to drive them in the trenches a little deeper, or they'll say, you know what? I do want to try this because I'm rebelling against what mom said. So it's just sort of like, but the boot on the neck approach is definitely not going to change anything. Like, the reason why we are in the position that we are not, like right now, I excuse a lot of people that's like 80, 90 years old, because I say, they sort of grew up in the Jim Crow era. So they got sort of like their own idea. Like, they grew up for 50, 60 years of their life with people saying, this is where you drink, this is where you use the restroom. So you can't hold them accountable for growing up in an environment where this was the norm. So the children now, they know, they sort of, okay, yeah, I can go in the bathroom and there's no issue. So it naturally changed, it naturally happened, but it was forced integration that done that. So was it to the advantage, was it to the greater good of the culture of society, or did it possibly put blacks at a disadvantage?
And I will, we're not going to end on this note because it's a down note, and I'll ask him to sort of elevate it back up. But I know you're all readers here, so you might have seen reference to the Brandeis study last year, looking at, really poking at this question of the discrepancy between wealth in black families, households, and in white. And it's gotten worse, actually. over the last 30 years. They thought it was going to get better. It's gotten worse. The gap has grown almost eightfold in the last 30 years. And the puzzle was, well, so many more African Americans have access to education. We thought education was going to be the great leveler. And it turns out it's not. It is exactly what you would expect if it's not education, which is home ownership. And I know you might want to say a word just about the way that cycle works. But people like me gain most of their wealth, not through speaking, believe it or not, but through home ownership. And even if you do own a home in Grand Rapids, if you're African American, it's likely to be valued just a hugely significant amount less than the house I own. And so rather than that, and in fact, home ownership among the African American community has lessened in the last 50 years rather than grown. I mean, that's a number of surprising results. Again, and what is that a result of? You know, everybody in the African American community, are they just making bad decisions, you know?
No.
Or again, is there a kind of underlying systemic racism that exacerbates it? And last word for me on this, my millennials will say, we are going to be different. You know, we will live in integrated neighborhoods and we will make the changes, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at the demographics, they're following exactly the same pattern as the Xers and the boomers and the terrible grandparents we just heard about. So.
But that study also showed that there was one couple that the lady said, well, I don't know why African Americans don't own their own home. We went to school, we did this, so on and so forth. Well, they found out later that her mother had cut her a $30,000 check once they got married to, you know, because that was like the norm back then. Oh, it's $10,000 for the purchase of your first home. And if you don't have access to capital to be able to do that for your children as an African American, it's sort of like, you know, putting you in a race where you were 100 yards back and it's a 100-yard race. You know, it's like, yep, you won. right. But I think access to capital is like one of the, like it has been shown, like it's not like we're just making up a lot of stuff, right? So statistically, and study after study have shown that African Americans are at a disadvantage when it comes to access to capital, access to medical care, access. So there's numerous issues that statistics, study after study have shown, and you know, and it's fact-based evidence. But how do you address that? How do you address 40 million people or 50 million people?
Well, we need a few more here, probably to start.
Donald Trump's not going to help us. I can tell you that right.
Are you at all hopeful? What are you hopeful about? If anything, looking forward.
Well, when my hair turned gray, I'll hope that my son inherits a better earth. You know, I think that things are improving. You still have pockets that in the Appalachian Mountains that, you know, comes out for people like Trump. But I think that just by everyone here listening and being able to listen and, you know, and smile and have fun, clearly there's a transition, you know. So our minds are changing, but we still have our own stereotypes and our own assumptions that, you know, we'll have to deal with. And that's not something you can change in 5 minutes. That's not something you can change in 20 years. It's like it's ingrained in you. So you sort of like you can suppress your assumptions, then you can begin to change your assumptions based upon your experiences and that kind of stuff. But I don't think that we'll see any significant change in, what, about 20 years younger than me? So I don't think I'll live to see that change. So I'm pretty sure you won't live to see it.
Well, I was kind of hoping we were going to end on a happier note than that. My imminent demise, but
there is a change. There's a major change.
Does it hurt? You're right. I love what you said. So maybe we'll just highlight this. So a room like this, full of so many diverse faces. Maybe that's, you know, come on.
I was going to wear a suit. And I said, you know what? If I wear a suit, they'll be focusing on my good looks and not my message. So I allowed you to focus on his good looks. Which you don't have no message.
Which apparently are disappearing rapidly. No. Forgive me for the last remark. I know this is a remarkably diverse, opening, welcoming community. I know that this is the kind of community when we come back here, we bring the family, because it seems to me, coming out of a religious background, much like many of yours, this is what's hopeful to me, right? Is that people relax a little bit, about it, people do draw on much greater experiences. They actually take account of empirical evidence, and to bring it full circle to where we started, you get more and more people who don't, or even if you make prima facie immediate judgments, right, on the basis of skin color, because we can't help it, we're just wired to do that way. Everybody understands there's an absurdity to that and is looking for some individual and collective way to move beyond it. That was one of the major purposes for developing the prison program in the first place. Thanks.